So, good afternoon again. This is the last session. This is foreign direct investment, the second, okay? So, we will have firstly Teresia Kunawan, if I prefer it right. Innovation and competitiveness of Asian companies in facing globalization, right? Okay. Well, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I will present my paper about innovation and competitiveness of Asian companies in facing globalization. At first, I want to explain that the role of SME in Asian countries are very important because the number of the unit SME in Asian countries are very significant. We can see from the data that 99% of unit business in Japan of SME is 99%, and in China is 99.7%, and Indonesia there is 99.99% the unit business of SME from the total of the business unit. And we can see also the employment creation from the SME that 88% provided by the SME in Japan and 74% provided by SME in China, and 99% provided by SME in Indonesia for the employment. And each of Asian country has their own characteristic. The export-oriented SME in Japan, Korea, China, Taiwan are quite stronger than the others of Asian countries such as India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And each of each country has their own characteristic. For the example, China are famous with their ability to produce a very cheap product, and they can also provide from the low quality product till the very high quality product. And then Malaysia now are famous with their contribution in global trading market in producing electronical goods and ICT. It's for the example. In the current globalization, scale and scope economy become not more important than creating value, and they don't need to be big to do the internationalization. And some of the strategy that used by the SME, they use acquisition strategy, merger, joint venture, and alliance strategy to get new brand, technological asset, and other resources that can enhance their competitive advantage. The Asian countries use the strategy that they combine the technology from the advanced country with the human resource and raw materials which are cheaper in their own country. And their strategy, at first, they receive order from the advanced country, and then they try to master the technology from the advanced country. After that, they not only stop at the level, and then they continue to learn how to make a good design of the new products. After they master how to produce the product, and then they master also how to make the design, then they offer their own brand and they sell the quite same product with the advanced country with the cheaper product to the global market. That's their strategy. Okay, and now we can see that the contribution of Asian countries in global trading system has been growing. It's from 10% in 1970s. Now they have been growing to 25% in 2006. And this is overtaking the North American free trade share about 20%. And the flow of the total FDI of East Asia to the world has expanded even faster, from 7% in 1980 into the 13% in 2006. And the flow of this FDI is intra-regional from China and Japan's country to other ASEAN countries. So country like Japan and ASEAN, they order raw material from the other Asian countries, such as from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Thailand, and then they sell the finishing good to the global market. And now we want to see the challenges for Asian SME. Nowadays, low-cost price in traditional competition are not longer sufficient for sustaining success in global competition. Now, SME, they must have ability to meet the global standard, and they must also have flexibility and innovation. They must have good design and differentiation. They must have also reliability of timelines, and they also must have networking and capacity to collaborate. But the problem of the SME, they have only limited skill in ICT, finance, operation management, accounting, marketing, and finance. And most of the SME in Asia, they don't have financial report. And the SME also face the higher costs in purchasing raw material, transportation, finance, to get finance, and business service. The third, they have limited access to get information about potential market, about buyer, because the lack of adequate infrastructure and scarcity of ICT skill. And it is not easy for the SME to meet the global standard. For the example, to meet the international agri standards such as ISO 9000 is about quality, ISO about environment, ISO about labor, and ISO about hazard analysis and critical point in the food industry. This is for the example. Okay. And we can see also that globalization also bring more tough competition in home market of the SME, because they must compete with the import product, foreign investor, and then the expanding of large domestic companies. Even though they have become a subcontractor from the large company, the SME also still face problems about investment to make its production process and product ready to meet the standard. Because frequently it needs new technology, new raw material, and additional workforce, which is mean they need more cash flow. However, it could be financially risk for the investing firm when the order or the contract is not forthcoming. Now I want to give a slight perspective from Indonesian. That Indonesia is a country that has abundant natural resources such as agriculture, oil, gas, mineral, wood, and other kind of product. But the technology and human resource capabilities in Indonesia are very limited. And this is different from the other Asian countries such as Korea and Taiwan, which is in 1960, they have already adopted the export strategy in manufacturing. In Indonesia, the characteristic of Indonesian manufacturing, they are limited technology capabilities and unskilled worker, and sometimes also the worker get easily to have strike. And this is also the unconducive situation makes Indonesian become less attractive destination for FDI than their neighborhoods such as China. So until the year 1990, manufacturing activity in Indonesia consisted of furniture, textile, leather products, and garment. We can see the difference. Indonesia just start their manufacturing activity in 90. Difference with the neighborhood like Korea, they start to produce the manufacturing activity since 1960. And after 90, Indonesia also start to produce electronic goods and office equipment, and this manufacturing industry are assisted by investors from Asian countries. While in 1988, Indonesia has been the 8th largest manufacturing sector among all the developing countries after China, Brazil, Korea, Mexico, India, Argentina, and Turkey. In the past, Indonesia only rely on its natural resources and cheaper human resources as their source of competitiveness. But now, this strategy is not enough to face the globalization. Because their neighborhoods such as Vietnam also can offer the cheaper human resources than Indonesia. And now, Int'l, the company Int'l, one of the biggest IT company in the world, they choose Vietnam as the country to invest $1 billion of money to build their plant in the Vietnam, because in Vietnam they can get very cheap human resources. So for Indonesia, it's not enough only to depend on their cheaper human resources, because it is not competitive anymore to the other Asian countries. So one of the solution for SME in Indonesia, they can learn to improve their innovativeness, because there is a consensus between the policymakers and academics that innovation is a crucial factor in generating firms growth, which leads to the country economic growth. When the SME do not need to be very big to do internationalization, or they face the globalization. And from the fact that some of Asian countries, they have experience in research and development and innovation, now they enjoy the profit and market share because they are pioneer in the market in innovation. And at this moment, more than 50% of economic growth come from innovation in technology. Therefore, it is not surprised that many of Asian countries, they invest much money in research and development to promote innovation and activities. And Japan, US, and Western Europe alone, they account about 2/3 of worldwide R&D expenditure. Innovation is believed as the adequate way to help the SME to compete with the large-scale firms on economic scale. But study about innovation is very well researched in developed countries, but only limited research has been made in developing countries. However, the result study about innovation in developed country, it is not known to what extent can be applied to the developing countries, since they have different characteristics. Because the SME of importance in generating economic growth, both of developed and developing countries are interested to find way in stimulating SME innovativeness. But interestingly, even though there is a strong intention to support the SME, but what firms should do and how to begin the process of innovation is remain unclear. And to innovate successfully, the firms need to search the source of innovation in order to develop continuously innovation. Therefore, I suggest that the research about innovation in small and medium enterprise must be conducted more and more. Thank you. That is my presentation.
Thank you very much. Can we proceed now with Mr. Bithwell? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Bethwell Kinyanjui. I am from Kenya, but pursuing my studies in the Netherlands. The title of my presentation is FDI Determinants and its impact on growth, and mine is a comparative study between Kenya and Malaysia. I start by looking at the essence of this comparison And the reason why I decided to take Kenya and Malaysia is basically because the two countries do share a similar colonial history. The fact that they were both colonized by the British, especially in the early 60s, and they obtained independence around the same time. They are ethnically heterogeneous, so the population is divided according to ethnicity. The mix is slightly different, but that's a fact. They both pursued mixed economies. For the period of consideration, they have enjoyed both more or less a stable government. And some of the policies they pursued at independence were more or less the same. And one of the reasons why, what has happened is that Malaysia today is an industrialized country, and Kenya, even after starting at the same level, has not been able to do very well. Although by the East African standards, Kenya is still a fairly prosperous country. So the question is, what is one reason why there has been divergence in the two countries? And one of the reasons, especially because of literature, what literature suggests about Malaysia is that one of the main reasons why they have succeeded very well has been because of their ability to attract foreign direct investment. Hence, that's the focus of my study. So if you look at a few statistics on foreign direct inflows in Kenya and Malaysia, you discover that in the 70s, we were more or less attracting more, a similar amount of FDI. But along the way, Malaysia have been able to attract more FDI compared to Kenya. In fact, if you look at Kenya, it's more or less like peanuts in the sight of what Malaysia has done. The huge drop from the 97 coming towards 2000 in Malaysia has been attributed to the Asian economic crisis. But generally, you see that in spite of the volatility in FDI, Malaysia has done quite well. Some studies argue that Malaysia, among the developing countries, has been rated among the most successful countries in attracting foreign direct investment. So the purpose of this paper then would be to explain the cause of divergence between the two countries. More importantly, how I intend to do that is by looking at the determinants of FDI in Malaysia, similar in Kenya, and whether really FDI is a driver for growth in the two countries. And then, of course, the lessons that we can draw from there. Now, literature is vast about this subject. At the moment, according to many studies, there are more than 9 theoretical models that try to explain why FDI moves to different countries. But when it comes to, when I zero down to Kenya and Malaysia, what I realize is that there are very few studies that have been conducted, and most of these studies tend to be macro in nature. And then when you get to, because the impact of FDI on growth is also a different aspect, there are several theoretical approaches towards growth, especially in the recent past, and one of them is a model by Barrow. Another one, what is called the MRW, which is Monkey, Roma, and Well in 1992. And then, of course, the Salai-Martin approach to, this basically is a growth theoretic framework. But what you see, the advantage of the MRW is the fact that it follows a systematic way of moving from theory towards empirical. What Barrow does is that he starts a lot of, most of all these, most of the factors that are considered to matter in FDI, in a regression, and then he tries to find out which one is statistically significant. Salai-Martins, on the other hand, uses the Bayesian statistics approach, which is a little bit complicated because you have to go now towards statistics. And hence, my choice of the MRW, which is consistent because it links literature. There is a nice flow from literature to empirical evidence. But more specifically, only a few studies have been able then to insert FDI within the growth model to be able to assess its direct impact on growth, and that is one of the things that my study does. In a nutshell, I just get all the studies that have been done on FDI and determinants for Kenya and Malaysia, and what you see is that most of these studies that tend to be macro in nature have identified a myriad of factors that would affect FDI. But what is important is that there's no study that has been done on the impact of FDI on growth, especially for Kenya. For Malaysia, it's very debatable because some studies will find that FDI causes growth, then other studies will find that it's the opposite. So there is the causality aspect there. But then in Malaysia, one or two studies have found that FDI has limited impact on growth, direct impact. So there could be other, maybe the impact of FDI in Malaysia could be indirect, which is also interesting. So what I do then, for my case, to deviate from these standard approaches, I embark on farm level study. So I spent 6 months in Malaysia in October to that period, and then the same thing with Kenya to collect farm level data. So questionnaires were administered and got about 65 responses from the farms operating in Kenya, foreign farms, and of course 59 farms in Malaysia. Now, what the advantage is that getting farm level data is not very easy. So even in a foreign country to get 59 farms, that is still an achievement given the period. Of course, what determined the extent to which I could have collected this data was the availability of resources, because it's part of my PhD program. So on the issue of the secondary approach I employ is a three-stage least squares, especially because I use ratios to try in determining FDI factors and its impact on growth. So if I just get to the results, what you see in the Malaysian case based on farm level data is that if it was a question of just identifying 3 most important factors, would have to do with infrastructure, according to farms. There is the issue of low cost, labor cost, and the issue of government support. So in a nutshell, those are the main 3 important determinants in Malaysia. Of course, the study involved a whole lot of other things, but I decided just to capture the gist of the story. Now, in Kenya, on the other hand, if you look at the determinants of FDI, market in Kenya, the market in Kenya and within its neighborhood becomes one. Political stability is another thing, and a stable economic growth in a country. Now, what you see from these two is a different nature of a different kind of FDI flowing to both countries. One, in Malaysia, what you see is that the nature of that FDI is resource seeking. In Kenya, what you see is market seeking, and that explains a lot, because FDI that is resource seeking tends to have a poverty dimension, in the sense that if it is labor intensive, then of course it can employ a lot of people, and therefore can easily lead to poverty reduction. And that is what Malaysia did, especially in the 70s. In Kenya, one of the reasons why Kenya has been unable to attract very high levels of FDI, according to statistics now, or according to the study, has to do with political instability. Quite a number of farms are very uncomfortable with what is going on in Kenya, especially because of the leaders not being able to sort out the issues well. What is happening in Somalia? Somalia is actually a direct neighbor of Kenya. And what happens also in Uganda? So that insecurity within the region seems to be an issue that has been raised by farms. The second, which is also very interesting, is the fact that crime and insecurity is of concern, because a lot of farms would love to operate there, but most of them tend to get their proper premises broken into and that kind of thing. And lastly is the issue of corruption. So corruption also rates quite highly in this study. And what then you see is that most of these impediments are political and institutional related for the Kenyan case. So getting to the secondary data, what I realized is that when I estimate a growth equation for Kenya and Malaysia, in the Malaysian case, it is true that FDI has a positive relationship with growth, but it does not have a direct impact on growth. So the impact is indirect, and I've taken into account the genuity aspect. So the whole argument that FDI is a driver for growth, especially for Malaysia, is partly true, because the indirect effect would be significant, because quite a number of studies have said that FDI contributes to the strengthening of the local capabilities of domestic farms. But generally, from these regressions, I realize that that FDI does not have a direct impact on growth. Secondly, okay, this is just one of the variables that I considered, which I thought was interesting. Again, openness seems to be important for FDI, but if you define it in terms of FDI, then does not really not significant when it comes to economic growth. Now, for Malaysia, economic growth has been, I mean, they have had an open economy for a very long time, so maybe that is a variable that hasn't changed to some extent. But in a nutshell, for Malaysia, at the macro level, macroeconomic stabilization factor seems to matter, openness and financial depth. Financial depth is important because after foreign firms establish themselves in Malaysia, the additional capital seems to be sourced from the local market, and therefore, I mean, there is evidence that quite a number of them, for their expansion activities, have drawn capital from the economy. Now, in Kenya, in contrast, FDI seems to play an important role, and I try to speculate why. The reason being that the level of domestic and capital accumulation in Kenya, capital accumulation in Kenya is very low, and therefore, most of the production of goods and services that takes place within the country is FDI driven, and therefore you'd expect that FDI to matter more than because the domestic market is not there. Now, Kenya has had a problem managing macroeconomic stabilization, and therefore these variables seem to affect FDI flows. And then the financial markets are not well developed. Of course, I considered quite a number of variables, but for the sake of time, I won't discuss them here. Now, so drawing now to the important lessons that we get from this analysis is that for the Malaysian case, the role of the government stands out. That much of the success in Malaysia has had to do with the government in terms of provision of incentives that have been very good, appealing to the foreign firms. The establishment of working institutions. Malaysia is famous for institutions from the 60s that were directly targeting foreign firms. Political stability has been another issue. And lastly, selective targeting. Not every kind of FDI is beneficial to a country, but Malaysia went straight to the FDI within the manufacturing sector. And confronted by unemployment, they opted for labor-intensive FDI. Now, this kind of thinking is not very popular in Kenya. The government is not very committed in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. There are very few incentives, if they do exist. Political stability has become a threat. Kenyan policymakers sometimes try to do everything most of the time. So it's not priority is not given to the sectors that would be driver for growth. And more importantly, for institutions, one of the things that you observe in Malaysia is that these institutions are well-funded and they have capacity. So they deliver the results. In Kenya, most of the institutions that are aimed at supporting foreign firms are in absentia. Now, security is also a big issue, which is unlike Malaysia, where expatriates and firms that operate find it palatable place, especially with their interests. In Kenya, it's an issue of concern. You get mugged. You're not very sure that so you have to incur additional costs to beef up security because some uninvited guests could frequent your premise. Then macroeconomic stability is of course an issue. Now, interesting enough is that Malaysia has a long tradition of stable macroeconomic stability, and that seems to have been quite favorite to a lot of firms. In Kenya, this has been a big challenge, and therefore it's an issue that policymakers would want to address. Then lastly, but not least, is the issue of infrastructure. Infrastructure, good roads, energy, and related accessories become important. For Malaysia, roads are excellent. You could think about world-class roads. I mean, they've done well. Kenya has, until recently, tried to embark on addressing infrastructure problems. And then, of course, the financial development is crucial, especially because of raising capital for these firms. One of the key variables I would consider here would be something like the cost of borrowing. or the cost of accessing credit in Kenya is really, really expensive, and therefore a lot of firms would not consider sourcing capital locally as a very viable option. And this is also reflected within the survey results. Well, in Malaysia, they have done to some extent quite well, because firms can access cheap credit at affordable prices or at affordable cost, and therefore this not only enhances profitability but serves them well. So I wish to stop here and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Bethwell. And now for Mr. Hoang and Mr. Geert? Mrs. All right. I'm sorry. It will be Mr. Ankos, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. For this moment, I will represent my Vietnamese friend who also studied in Maastricht, but she failed to come here. She want to present about the indicators to capture FDI absorptive capacity. So the authors think that the successful implementation of foreign direct investment depends on the ability to absorb that kind of FDI of the countries. So the absorptive capacity of each country differ. Okay. For the first time, the author wants to describe about what is absorption in the FDI context. Absorption means the assimilation of foreign direct investment in a given host economy. Thus, absorptive capacity denotes the maximum amount of foreign direct investment that a host economy can assimilate or integrate into the economy in meaningful manner. The next question is, what factor capture the national absorptive capacity? FDI absorptive capacity from previous studies are looking from two perspectives. One is domestic firms and one is the nation. The literature for the capacity in domestic firms, including technological intensity and qualified of labor. Meanwhile, the literature who look the absorptive capacity from nation perspective, including technological level, human capacity, financial development, and institutional development. Then the author tried to make a combination and to test by their questionnaire, etc., to make a photosynthesis that includes 6 factors, including absorptive capacity of domestic firms, human capital, development of financial infrastructure, development of physical infrastructure, technology and research development, and development of institutional system. So 4 of the authors try to make indicators for measure the absorptive capacity of countries based on these 6 factors. They believe that there is a gap in the literature about the lack of a direct empirical measure of absorptive capacity has not only caused some problems with comparability of the result, but has also led to little research on process by which absorptive capacity is developed. The aim of the study is to suggest a set of indicators to measure the absorptive capacity, or they make it into ABC, of a country. The methodology, they use the 6 factors mentioned before, and based on the literature review, and they use 8 key dimensions to dig this kind of factors. The result, some of the result is presented in this PowerPoint, but the complete one is in the paper. First is absorptive capacity of a domestic firm measured by research and development, such as research and development spending as a share of total turnover and research and development intensity. Second, knowledge and individual skills, For example, employee skill level. And third, organizational structure and human resource management. Example, regular meetings of department heads to discuss innovation-related topics. The second indicator is human capital. Human capital is measured by the average years of schooling in the population above 25 years of age and the average years of secondary schooling in total population. The third indicator for development of financial infrastructure are measured by the value of this domestic share at NSE as percentage of GDP, the turnover of national stock exchange as a percentage of GDP, total domestic credit claims on private sector as percentage of GDP, and the ratio of liquid liabilities to GDP. For development of physical infrastructure is measured by transportation, water supply, water disposal, etc. is measured by the physical infrastructure index. Then the technology and research development levels is measured by gross domestic expenditure of research and development as a percentage of GDP, research and development expenditure by business enterprises in percentage of all funds, the number of research and development personnel per capita, research and development personnel business per capita, and number of patents in force. For institutional system is measured by government index such as voice and accountability, political stability, absence of violence, government effectiveness, regulation quality, rule of law, control of corruption. As the conclusion, the paper suggested 90 indicators which are most applied and accepted in the previous empirical research. The set of indicators provides most effective methodologies and guidance to measure the absorptive capacity. The indicator provides available resource factor as well as secondary data resource to scholars and researchers. Because she is enabled to come to Greece, she wished to have an input about her thinking about these indicators. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, every one of you. Are there any questions? Well, I don't think they are. Well, I have two comments, maybe. One is to Teresia. You mentioned that there is that Indonesia is losing its place on the FDI levels compared to Vietnam, right? Is that due to lower labor cost because of Vietnam? And you mentioned that Indonesia is supposed to face that with innovation. But it just seems a little bit awkward if they do not have any research and development, why they do not compete on the same level with Vietnam regarding on the level of cost, labor cost.
Why I suggest that more research about innovation for Indonesian SME, because now for Indonesia they cannot compete anymore with offering the lower level of lower salary for their human laborers, because if they follow Vietnam and they lower the wage or the salary of their labor force, the labor will be strike in Indonesia, and this makes the economic situation become worse and worse in Indonesia. That's why rather compete in the price to lower the salary of their labor, so better for Indonesia to looking for another competitiveness as to make the innovation and more investigation about in research and development and to create innovation product. It's also can apply the strategy of blue ocean strategy. So better to get to win the market with the other way, not compete only with the price, but we can offer the uniqueness of our products.
Thank you very much. Very clear. And Bithwel, I cannot see you. Maybe you can see me on the screen. You mentioned that you used 3-level least squares, right? And you use firm level data and secondary data. I suppose that's on the macro level?
Yes.
Right. So is it in the same model? Is it generalized least squares where you use firstly the firm level data and then the macro?
No.
Okay.
For the second,
yes?
for the secondary data, that's what I use. The 3-stage least squares. So that's for secondary data. Okay. Yes.
Okay, it was not clear. And for the firm level data, is it what kind of model is it? Is it least squares with binary variables?
No, that is descriptive statistics.
Just descriptive.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well then, thank you then, clearly. Well, that is all. Okay.
Well, I know that it's always the same problem, but we can wonder if it makes any sense to compare Kenya and Malaysia. Because of the very low level of foreign direct investment in Kenya. You talk about determinants of foreign direct investment, we can talk about determinants of no foreign direct investment indeed. But, well, maybe the model works and so on. From an econometric point of view, okay, no problem. But from an economic point of view, does it really make any sense, given the very low level of foreign direct investment in Kenya, to compare it?
Well, that's an interesting question because in the Malaysian mirror, the level of FDI in Kenya is low, but within the East African, by the East African standards, it's quite high. So it's a case where you're talking of a giant versus Goliath. Goliath still, I mean a giant versus a small person, but basically the small person still exists. So in fact, the Kenyan government has embarked on a very aggressive program to attract more FDI firms. Actually, as at now, you're talking about more than 800 firms, foreign firms in Kenya. So that is peanuts compared to thousands of foreign firms in Malaysia. So there's a big difference. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that foreign direct investment does not exist. Yeah.
Okay, then thank you very much. I believe this is it. But we have Professor Pitelis enjoy his speech later on after a break. Thank you.